Okay. Hi, I'm Glenn Gilmore, and for 8 years I had the privilege of serving as mayor of a community of about 90,000 people. And today I serve as an educator and also as a Microsoft brand ambassador. And I'm very excited to have with us Kevin Tupper, who is a Federal Generative AI Evangelist at Microsoft. And Kevin, I've got to imagine that in the world, you're one of the first people to have that title. Can you help us understand what it means?
Sure. I would hate to say it's self-explanatory, but it almost is. So, when you think of it,
To you, yes. But to the rest of us, it might not be.
when you think of a technological evangelist, right? They're breaking new ground and moving, helping opening up new markets, that sort of thing, with passion and zeal and fervor. So, that kind of fits my personality well. I was speaking with a group of folks, senior executive service leaders in something called the Public for Public Partnership for Public Service AI Leadership Cohort back in December of this year, and I was going to give a talk on adopting AI for government and how to leverage AI as part of the Microsoft subject matter expert. And that was my talk came out a week after ChatGPT was launched. And so the timing was crazy. I was basically doing a data and AI work at that time.
Right.
And I shared with everybody, I said, I asked how many people knew about ChatGPT. Very few people had raised their hand. I said, well, I want to tell you, your world has changed and you don't know it yet. And so I proceeded after that talk, went back to my manager and said, this is obviously Microsoft has already had a partnership with OpenAI, and we were doing some things in this space, but it just had not been viral the way everything went with ChatGPT so quickly. And so I just said, hey, can I pivot my role? And this is what I would like to do, and outlined a plan, and she was all for it. And so I, my role term didn't come up until later on, but I've been doing the same thing for 8 months, basically helping the federal government understand this viral technology. And, AI is not new, but the capabilities of delivering this kind of quality human-like output from a machine learning model is new. And so I'm helping the federal government understand, develop guidance and policy, to even doing adoption, like getting hands-on getting coding. So I'm covering that whole spectrum. It's exciting.
Now you mentioned that when you discuss the topic of generative AI, you tell people that our world has changed. And can you help us understand what it is that makes generative AI so different, and why and how will it change our world?
So I think we've been using technology for all this time to make our physical lives generally easier. This is a technology that helps us take mental work, and we can do mental work and have it do it for us. In certain, not in everything, but in certain ways. And it's a new model, a new way of thinking. So that the AI is actually becoming the platform. And the language of controlling or manipulating or guiding the platform is going to be in language, right? Spoken language in this case. Previously, when you wanted to build workloads or build solutions, generally you'd have to get someone like me. I've made my living at the intersection of technology and business, and then the last 6 years of technology and government. And you've always needed somebody who could bridge that gap from I'm an administrator, or this is my role. I run this kind of business and I need to do this kind of work. And how do I get technology to do that? And so I think what we're seeing is a fundamental shift where we're now moving into an area where people like me aren't needed as much, and language will be able to, if I can articulate the problems I'm trying to solve, and help guide a solution to an AI model of some kind, it can help bring me along that way. Now we're not there yet. This is a emerging technology, right? But that I think is what I mean by what I said.
And Kevin, from what we can understand, it seems that we're really talking about a situation in which we could pretty much have a conversation with a computer that we can ask it for information, and it can literally converse with us back with some information. But as I look at it, and others do as well, colleagues that I speak with, they say, but there's that real niche of being able to ask the right question and to formulate the quote unquote prompts that give you the best information. And so I guess that's one of the challenges we're going to see as we try and take what's a conversational technology, but really one that still needs that guidance from people like you.
Yeah, no question. The biggest thing is understanding and literacy, right? To know, as you were saying, how to work with this technology. Most of the time when we talk about you becoming technical literate, we're talking about learning about, but AI literacy is learning too. Like if I said, do you know how to read? I'm not asking you, do you know about reading? I'm asking you, do you know how to read?
Right.
And you get better at reading by reading more. And the same thing with, I think, this generative technology. You're going to get better at using it and communicating with it by communicating with it. But there's what I want to make sure I didn't overstate something, particularly because it's a myth and it's a concern. I think not just the federal government, but everywhere that I see is people ascribe to this technology agency that it doesn't have and abilities that it doesn't have. It as a model, it doesn't. Generative AI. Large language models in general. Obviously I deal mostly with OpenAI for Azure's OpenAI model and Microsoft, which is a ChatGPT 3.5 or GPT 3.5 and GPT 4. It doesn't know anything.
Wait a second. What do you mean it doesn't know anything, Kevin?
It doesn't have knowledge representation and think of things the way you and I think, right? We use these terms, think and reason, but that's not how it works. It's really just a mathematical model. So if you were to think of it as having been trained on all of the use of language, and all is broad, right? I'm overstating there, but just most of the content on the internet, what it actually does is it understands, air quotes understands, it knows probabilistically what words follow other words, how language relates to each other, not just English, but other languages as well, and computer languages. So what it's doing is when you ask it a question or prompt, it's basically looking and saying, if this was the information that I had, and the context isn't just my question, the context might be information a developer also fed into the model as part of that application you're using, it then very simply starts generating what's the next likely output to come from what I've seen so far. So it's like an autocomplete. So it doesn't know. So that's why it does fabricate things completely, or some people call it hallucination, because it doesn't know. It's basically saying, what's the next likely word? And throw a little randomization in, and it sounds very human-like. So the goal of the model was actually not to be a fact database. It was to generate human-like output given human input. And then it was also to follow instructions. So with those two things in mind, that's what I meant by being able to take the model and give language to it, to have it do things for me, not answer questions for me. It might do that well, it might not do that well, because it's probabilistic about, it's based on probability. But to actually do things, now I can actually bring my data to it, or my tasks or work to it, and then have it respond and do things on those tasks.
Well, that's kind of the question I have then. Why should people in government care about generative AI?
Yeah, that's so I would say two reasons. One, anything that has attracted this much attention, the government should care about, just by the nature of what the government's role and function is, right?
Sure.
So we should care about it. The government should care about it because citizens are using it everywhere. So that's one reason. But more importantly, for government itself, there's a a large section of work. Most people think about these as chatbots that you can start to interact with because they see ChatGPT. To me, that's the tip of the iceberg with a lot more of the value underneath that. And so I can take work that I normally would do, for example, summarize a document, right? I get all kinds of documents that I have to review, and normally I'll have to quickly scan them. I might just say, summarize the document, give me a list of topics that it's talking about, and let me know, or here's the things that I'm concerned about for my role. Are any of these in here?
That's huge. That's huge, Kevin. That what you've just explained to me is huge, because that's like a personal assistant that you can say, you know, I've got a ton of these reports I've got to review and understand what they're about, and generative AI, you know what my role is. What are the things I need to be concerned about? That's the sort of thing that we're talking about here. That's how it could be used by people in government, correct?
Yeah, that kind of value with a little, and there's sometimes some programming that's involved in that, so it's not just taking the model, because you want to make sure you have rights to the data and the sensitivity and those sorts of things. But by and large, that's the simplistic task. Other tasks could be go through this contract and extract key value pairs based on who the contract is with, what are the terms, when are any payments due, and you can train. And not train in the traditional AI sense, but you can experiment and write your prompts to get value coming out of that consistently with all the proper mitigation and risk mitigation, depending on how it's done. But then once you have that, you can codify it into a pipeline that says, okay, run all my contracts through this and put all those out. So, any kind of job, I'm a risk officer. I have certain parameters, review this contract. Here's the parameters that I'm looking for, analyze the contract for these certain risks and highlight them to me. Not do anything with them, but highlight them to me as a risk officer to bring them to my attention so that I can make a decision.
So we're looking at a technology that really has application for just about everyone in government. And the question I have, we're looking at big organizations when you talk about government. How do you provide that workforce with an understanding of what generative AI is and how to use it? How do you train at scale?
That's a great question. I don't really have an answer, to be candid. I mean, I'm doing my part as .com, where I'm trying to help people understand it. And part of my role, at Microsoft, of course, is going and explaining it. But it really is, it's a trust situation that we have to learn how to understand what it does, to trust it, to put the proper guardrails around just generative AI in particular, but AI in overall. And the good thing is this is not a hard learning curve from an adoption standpoint. If you can have a conversation and then evaluate responses to that conversation, whether you're a developer writing an actual system using it or someone that's interacting with generative technologies built into like Microsoft's copilots, where you can actually interact with your data or your office calendar, let's say, within Copilot. We've built all kinds of safeguards within there, but you still can interact and ask questions. And so I think if you can develop those sorts of skills and learn how to do it and learn how it's responding, you're going to have literacy. But it's experimental.
And there's a learning curve, as you know. I'm wondering, how does it work? What's the pathway, for example, if a mayor of a city or a director of a governmental authority makes that decision, we want to embrace generative AI and tap into that incredible opportunity. What does the pathway look like when they reach out to a company like Microsoft to put into place that sort of a framework so that people are trained, so that there's governance, so that people can begin to start using this and having those new efficiencies?
Yeah, I think I've been doing this, I said, for 8 months, having these initial conversations, and have thought quite a bit. I have my own mental model that I've developed, AGT, I call it.
Go ahead.
Not America's Got Talent, but AI literacy, governance, and technology. And this is not an official Microsoft model. It's just my own mental model.
But what you've just said seems to be kind of the way I would expect that you have that understanding. You get that literacy. You talk about governance, and then you begin with an implementation of some sort of a framework. So that kind of sounds to me like the perfect sort of pathway I would want to see as a mayor if I'm looking at saying, all right, tell me how you're going to do this. Well, you've given it a nice way of how to do that.
Yeah, it's my mental model, right, of thinking that, because you can't start. It's not progressive. It's all at once. So because you can't learn how to use AI and prompt without the technology being there, and you shouldn't put it there without governance of some kind in place, because it's not something that you just want to open up to the public, like with my company or my government data. So to me, what we've been suggesting to most of our customers is a sandboxed environment that is safe, secure, very limited within the agency or bureau or department, depending on how the agency is structured, where they can set up Azure OpenAI that's secure, that's private, that's their data is their data, there's no data leakage, and begin to set up some tools that they can experiment with and start to just interact, as opposed to doing it, say, on the public websites like ChatGPT.
To help understand, so what you're talking about is helping that governmental authority understand its own data, to have that protected data, but to begin to use that data to answer questions, to add efficiencies. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, and then and start to learn where AI works and where it doesn't work for them with that data. Because again, back to my original premise of the value being below the water, right? The iceberg analogy. I need to be working with my data and the prompting to see what kind of value. If I ask for a summary of a 70-page document, that won't fit in AI's context window. So I have to maybe write some programs to break that up into smaller chunks. I might want to have a summary that's a particular bent. Like, for instance, I might, if I'm the human resources department, a human capital officer or something like that, I might say, evaluate this document with my eyes, right? So you're a human capital officer, review and give me a summary that's directed for someone like me. Or I might say, I'm a technologist helping government understand and adopt AI, summarize the AI Bill of Rights, and what would a technologist need to understand from it. So you can guide all that your own way, but that's best done in a sandbox environment.
I was just going to say, I like your suggestion of starting with a sandbox and working out from there. I also like the fact that you mentioned simultaneously you should immediately have in place a governance team. Can you help us understand what that governance team is going to look like? Because I know for governmental leaders, trust, transparency, inclusivity, and the correctness of this technology are so important to public trust. What does a governance team look like?
Well, it's multidisciplinary, so it's not just technologists, it's not just administrators. Depending on a lot of it, you can have like an overarching one, but generally, Microsoft has put a lot of mitigation layers and progress in developing a model with OpenAI, or OpenAI, I should say, has put that in. And then in our own co-pilots and those sorts of tools, we have our own set of mitigation layers and analysis of harm and protection around the model itself.
So allow me to interrupt you. So when you do that partnership and that collaboration, you do provide kind of here are some suggestions on that framework, and here are some suggestions on how you're going to vet the information and provide that transparency and trust. So people aren't creating the wheel. They come into it with some nice rich resources.
Yeah. So we have a whole responsible AI standard. It's version 2.0 now. I mean, this isn't new to Microsoft. We've been developing AI responsibly for years now. And the whole idea of the standard is a way of thinking about harms and risks and ethics. And we have a whole framework around it and some tools as well that those developing derivative applications from the technology can apply so that they can measure and test and evaluate before releasing anything as an application. Has to be part of it. Even outcomes, right? There's open source tools like FairLearn where you can measure, data scientists can, of course, with specialized algorithms to measure outcomes. And so there's all kinds of guardrails that you want to put in. And back to your earlier question, so on the team, from a government standpoint, you're going to want data scientists. You want someone who understands the technology. You're going to probably want budgetary people to from a cost standpoint for sure, as well as I would say if you're writing your own tools that you're making decisions upon, you're going to want somebody that's an ethicist on that tool, on that environment. If it's something like extract data from a document, the ethics person might be like, okay, yeah, no, go ahead. But if it's something like, hey, we want to analyze these sets of documents to develop a policy around low-income housing, well, you're going to want an ethicist involved in those sorts of discussions from a governance standpoint for sure, because now the potential harm is far greater than I pulled out a date from a field and put it into a line of business application.
And how do we protect against bias?
Data, for sure, right? You have to have data sources that are trustworthy. Microsoft, again, does a lot of that initial work for the model itself.
So that, but that's a key point, because we all understand how important it is to make sure that when we adopt a technology like generative AI, it's not going to have embedded in it bias. But again, you pointed out the fact that Microsoft has worked a very long time, years, with artificial intelligence, and so it has a framework and an understanding of how you protect against bias. And so again, those are some of the resources you get to bring to bear.
And with co-pilots, Microsoft, they use the term co-pilot very specifically because you're the one in control. None of that data from your co-pilot should be going out without human review. I want to say, can you permanently eliminate any kind of bias? That humans have bias, even just like it. So if that's built into our biases, everyone has a bias at some point.
But the key is, are you doing all you can to
exactly
bridge that bias, to be aware of that bias,
and
to take remedial action where you can as well, to make sure that there's that inclusivity and that tool that benefits everyone as well.
Right. Yep. And having the proper remedial channels in place, if something, whether normal AI or generative AI creates something that's unbiased, right? You do need those sorts of remediation capabilities in place as well to quickly to deal with those sorts of things. I think the bigger concern for government as they move forward is to make sure that if they use derivative products from the models themselves and build things, that they're evaluating their data sources, right? Are the data sources they're using, that they're bringing to the model to do work on, vetted and cleaned, and do they have bias? Are they equitable? Do they represent everyone fairly? Those are all kinds of things that you have to think about when you're building any kind of an AI system, and more so when the risk is higher, right? Not that you would do them less in certain cases, but I like to use the movie recommendation system from. And Glenn, I don't know if I shared this story with you when we were talking earlier about responsible AI, but my daughter recommends movies to me all the time. Sometimes she recommends a dud. I'm like, yeah, not really good, Holly. But what's the cost? What's the harm? The harm was I lost $15 and an hour and a half of 2 hours, whatever it was. not a great societal harm for anybody from, on that particular thing. Or if she missed a good movie, like it was a false negative, I'm like, why didn't you tell me about this? This was a great movie. That's a whole lot different than, hey, we're going to create a policy for you name it, and it's going to affect a group of people.
Healthcare.
Right? So totally two different risk profiles and two different levels of concern and mitigation and remediation that you have to deal with.
I'm sorry about that. Can you help us understand some use cases? Can you cite some use cases where generative AI is being used in a government setting?
I have to be really careful, obviously, of course, mentioning specific customers. I can tell you the basic chat over my data is a big one, because right now Microsoft is still in the process of rolling out and developing the co-pilots. It's available for Microsoft 365, but not for those customers who are using the government tenant at this point in time. So one of the biggest things, because government has data, like those summarize this document type of thing. Those are the kinds of things we're seeing asked for. Just general chat over my data. And that's what we're stressing to, hey, just sandbox it first so you get used to it and understand it. That's the application that we're always recommending everybody just start with. And then I'm seeing several, as I've been evangelizing, several people are starting to realize real good value use cases that are very low risk, that are mundane work for people that they just have to do. It's part of their jobs, whether it's data entry, reviewing a document and typing data entry, taking information from a handwritten form and putting it into a database. Those sorts of work where generative AI makes quick work of it, and it can be scaled and done safely without any kind of harm. So those are the two ends of that we're starting to see. We've heard a lot of interesting use cases as well, that have high value regarding things like training, and we're starting to move down those paths too.
And as you look to generative AI and the future of generative AI in government, what do you expect to see in the very near future in terms of government using generative AI in different ways?
I would expect that it's going to reflect very quick, and this is just my own, not a Microsoft opinion, not I'm not clairvoyant, so who knows if it's accurate or not. But I've seen enough value in the technology, and I've talked to enough people in the private sector and in the government sector. I've not seen this kind of enthusiasm. I've been working in government space for 6 years. I've not seen this kind of enthusiasm or energy behind evaluating, understanding, and getting a technology approved or implemented or learning about, and anything so far, like in 6 years, to the point where when I first was having my initial meetings, I had hundreds of people showing up on, remote meetings, of course, showing up to understand and learn about this. And that's because everyone's child was coming home and saying, oh, what's this? Right? When your dentist got his hand in your mouth and saying, well, tell me about this prompt engineering. And I'm just like, because it's everywhere. So the reason why I think government will move faster here, not just because of the value, because it's become acceptable as part of everybody's everyday life, and their own lives apart from government, right? So meaning I'm a government administrator, and whether you have grandkids or kids, you might be getting on some sort of generative AI model and say, oh, let's write a story about you, and just having fun with it, right? So you're seeing the value and you're starting to see the capabilities, and I think that bleeds over just into people's lives, and just saying, you know what, we have to figure out how to use this well, because it's just we're not there yet. Don't make a mistake. I don't want to overstate it, but there probably was a time when the typewriter came out and we're saying, well, why would we want to use that technology? And this will become so ubiquitous in the future, not today, but in the future, that I think it's quite commonplace. It's like using computers as it replaces the platform.
It will change our world is how we began, and it certainly sounds from what you've been able to share with us, Kevin, that there is a pathway that makes great sense in terms of starting with a sandbox, starting with governance, and looking at ways in which this technology will have an ability to add some great efficiencies to government, and to do it for a workforce that can say we can all participate in it to make government far more efficient, far faster than we might have ever imagined that a technology would. So I very much appreciate your being able to help us understand what it is that generative AI can do in government and to help improve all of our lives. Kevin, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm wondering, do you want to do any additional, for me to ask you any additional question or to provide any additional information? And I give my apologies since I had that phone call interrupt us. Okay, so I just
I'm good.
Okay, sounds good. So
Yeah.
I'll go ahead.
I was
Please.
gonna say I just would need to have like I don't think I said anything that was too untoward that Microsoft is gonna like go.
Oh, no. So you'll get to see. I'm going to do kind of a quick edit that will just shorten it up a little bit and get that your way. Make sure you're comfortable with it, and I don't do anything with it until you all tell me it's good to go. So
yeah, I'll be comfortable with it. I'm not worried. I just want to make sure that I didn't.
I love your approach because you're very candid about what it is, and I think that gives people a lot of comfort. It gives me comfort in terms of I think people would say I want to work with this guy because he's not going to tell us something that isn't really true about the technology. So I love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm sure they're going to be okay. They just get they get really squeamish about AI and government, right? Because it's top of mind and regulatory concerns and all the nonsense that's been written about what ChatGPT can and can't do.
Well, I think you were very constrained, like in terms of circumspect, and so and you talked about governance and you didn't overstate. So
yeah, they should be okay.
I would think so. Yeah, I would think so.
If they're not, I don't mind re-recording. It's if they say, hey, this is
I'm the same way. So and don't you hesitate. Tell them not to hesitate to say, you know what, we'd love to add an additional question, or we'd love to kind of rephrase an additional, and I'm happy to weave that in. I just have to remember, well, I try and wear the blue shirt, so it makes it real easy. Don't forget that shirt, put that aside.
yeah, exactly.
All right, cool. You have yourself a great weekend, and thank you.
Great, you too. Thanks, Glenn.
All right,
enjoy.
Sure, bye-bye. All right,
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.